hello everybody, you're welcome back again to the Reggae Appreciation Society. Bob Marley is without a doubt one of the most inspirational figures this planet has ever seen. A Rasta ambassador who used music as a weapon to free the minds of the oppressed, regardless of race, color, or creed. But in the final years of his life, Africa, the motherland, would receive special attention from the Tough Gong. In April 1980, Bob Marley would visit Africa for the very last time to play a historic show marking the independence of the new nation of Zimbabwe. It's gone down as one of the country's most memorable historic events and an unbelievably satisfying labor of love by the Tough Gong, who by then had been heavily drawn to Africa since his first visit to Ethiopia 2 years earlier. When he arrived in Zimbabwe, he received a hero's welcome like no other and discovered that he wasn't just among the most famous people in that place, but was something very close to the spiritual leader of that country's independence movement that orchestrated Zimbabwe's hard walk to freedom. Let's take a look at the intrigue, the passion, and the ultimate triumph of Bob Marley's visit to Zimbabwe. 4 months earlier, in December 1979, Bob Marley was wrapping up a sizzling 3-month tour promoting his new album, Survival, a militant masterpiece regarded as the most potent pro-African and radical reggae album ever recorded. It was Bob's Afrocentric magnum opus that sported album art that was a patchwork of the different flags of African countries. Around the same time, the long drawn-out Zimbabwean War for Independence, popularly known as the Second Chimurenga, was also winding down, and the Southern African country was about to get independence. The country's Independence Day ceremony was fixed for 18th of April 1980, and the organizing committee went to work putting it all together. The point man was Comrade Edgar Tekere, a top-ranking member of the new government and one of the previous leaders of the guerrilla forces that birthed the idea of Bob Marley, the world reggae ambassador and visionary Pan-Africanist, performing at Zimbabwe's historic independence celebrations. For as long as Comrade Tekere could remember, the Tough Gong sound had been the soundtrack of their struggle, as he and his men had always played Bob's music on cassettes in their bush camps during the war. And almost like an omen, the album Survival with the hit track Zimbabwe had been released just a few months to the end of that conflict. Comrade Tekere was determined to bring Bob over. To get this done, he would get help from an unlikely team of a nightclub owner, businessman, barman, and a radio DJ. He was a regular at a nightclub called the Playboy, and while knocking back drinks with the owner named Job Kadengu and a businessman named Gordon Muchandyuka, he told them that he wanted to get Bob Marley to perform at the independence ceremony coming up in about 2 weeks' time, but he had no clue on how to get it done. The barman overheard their conversation and chipped in with the name of a man called Mike Mudwa, a radio DJ who hosted a reggae show every week and was someone that could help. So they sent for him, and luckily it turned out that he had been responsible for ordering records from Bob's label Island Records to play on the show and had their London phone number. After getting in touch with Island's London office, he was referred to Island's office in Kingston, and when he called, he was connected to Neville Garrick, Bob's longtime friend, artist and designer of all of Bob's record covers, and the manager at Tough Gong record label. When they told Garrick what they wanted, he got back to Bob, who immediately agreed and sent word back to them through Garrick. But while Bob was happy to go, Chris Blackwell and the entire Island Records management team weren't keen on him going down to Zimbabwe, especially as the country had recently just seen plenty of instability and violence. But Bob's mind, however, was already made up, and when Job Kadengu and Gordon Muchandyuka showed up in Jamaica to personally hand Bob the official invitation, it was just a formality. Even when a brief chat revealed that the organizing committee couldn't afford to pay Bob, it didn't matter as he had decided to foot the bill. Bob personally paid for rental of 21 tons of top-of-the-line musical equipment from England at an enormous cost, as well as £100,000 to hire a Boeing 707 to fly it from London to Harare. So Bob and his crew set out and arrived in the country on the 16th of April to a rousing welcome by a multitude of people. A welcome ceremony was held, hosted by the country's ceremonial president, Kanan Banana. Given the historical and cultural importance of the event, he brought Ziggy and Stephen along, and they famously posed for a picture, with Stephen holding a rifle belonging to one of the soldiers assigned to guard them. The humongous musical equipment arrived the next day and was transported to the Rufaro Stadium and set up for a sound check. The equipment was on a scale as the country had never seen before, and the sound was so powerful that people in a town called Mufakose, about 15 kilometers away could hear Bob rehearsing and would excite hundreds of thousands of people who would swarm the venue the next day. So all was set, and the independence ceremony went smoothly, and the new Prime Minister, Robert Mugabe, was sworn in the presence of foreign dignitaries and heads of government from around the world, including the then Prince Charles and the Indian Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi, all in front of a 40,000 strong crowd at the Rufaro Stadium. The climax of the event came just before midnight, when Mugabe lit the independence flame and Zimbabwe's new flag was raised for the first time. The first announcement made in the newly independent country were presenting Bob Marley and the Wailers, and the heavy throbbing instrumentals of the song Natural Mystic began to reverberate around the stadium, sending the audience into ecstasy. Wailers guitarist Al Anderson boomed into this microphone, "Viva Zimbabwe" and "Rastafari," provoking a mighty response from the crowd, before Bob Marley came on stage and delivered a fantastic 42-minute long performance, like a religious experience that had many in the crowd shedding tears of joy, especially when he performed the song Zimbabwe. The euphoria of the event, however, gave way to some controversy when people outside the stadium who were grooving to Bob's music got a bit too excited and tried to force their way in. The police and soldiers set on them with batons and tear gas, an occurrence that would upset Bob deeply, and he would later describe the incident as madness. He was terribly disappointed at what looked like a continuation of the oppression that was supposed to be ending. Bob and the band were forced to go backstage for a while due to the overpowering tear gas, and in obvious disappointment, he echoed some lyrics from the song Zimbabwe to his band when he said, "Now we have found out the real revolutionary." But Bob would make it up to the masses who couldn't attend with another show the next day, this time to a humongous crowd of over 100,000 people. After the show, Mike Mundwa showed Bob and the band a few sights in Harare, like the Playboy nightclub where the idea to bring him to Zimbabwe was first hatched, and a spot called the Blue Bar at Machipisa in Highfield. The next day, Job Kadengu organized a trip to Victoria Falls, where the Tough Gong had a ball. But of course, before the Tough Gong left, he did some trademark Tough Gong things. He would visit a rural town called Mutoko, about 2 hours drive from Harare, where he paid a special visit to some herb farmers. It's said that he sampled their crops thoroughly while mixing and mingling with the ordinary townsfolk. Bob had a fantastic time in Zimbabwe and told Mike Mundwa that he wanted to establish a Tough Gong studio in the country. Together, they scouted places where the studio could be built. So Bob and the crew left Zimbabwe after a few days, and according to people close to Bob, he left the motherland on a high, no pun intended, and was making serious plans to return and make many investments, as he was already making moves to start spending more time on the continent. He had gone to Ethiopia on pilgrimage in 1978 and Gabon in 1979 on the invitation of his girlfriend, the daughter of the then president, and his Zimbabwe visit was the next step in what was supposed to be a slow and steady movement to establish heavy presence in Africa. But sadly, Bob passed away just over a year after making that trip. The Tough Gong spent his whole life dreaming about going to Africa, and thankfully he was able to pull it off in his last years on Earth. Then he was at the peak of his fame and influence, so one can only imagine the amount of impact that he might have had on the continent and actually established as he had planned. All we can do is dream. So there you have it. Thank you for watching the video today. Please leave a like, subscribe, and until next time, Jah bless.